Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Art of NGF podcast. As always, I'm Garrett Daun, and today I'm here with Deverai Sandberg. Am I pronouncing that correct?
Devraj, or just Dev.
Devraj. Okay. It's interesting because in Croatia, the J is always pronounced Y because they don't have a Y in the alphabet. So my brain has swung over to pronouncing that way. So Devraj Sandberg. And this is kind of a co-produced podcast episode. So Devaraj, why don't you just tell us a little about your production so your folks know what they're watching?
Yeah, well, I'm a bioenergetic therapist, or that's what I call myself. I work as basically a therapist in Brighton, in the south of the UK, and I started a YouTube channel on bioenergetics, which is a kind of a therapy driven slightly from shamanic roots and also the work of people like Wilhelm Reich and Alexander Lowen, because I kind of noticed that no one else was doing it really, and there was very little information out there. And I've been quite busy with the fact that 20 years ago, I was doing a lot of really deep, intense therapeutic process work actually at an Osho center in Holland. And that this work has kind of died out over the last couple of decades. It was kind of a little bit in the process of going then. And nowadays, there's actually a lot of people, men and women and young guys and whatever, who want to have a more challenge. They want to challenge. They want to face themselves in a kind of held environment, and they're interested in bio. They're interested in screaming and shouting stuff, in counter therapy, primal, whatever. And yet, it's very hard for them to find anyone who does it, or the only guys who do it are now like 85 and hardly doing it anymore, stuff like that. So even though I'm aging a bit now, I'm kind of jumping a little bit into that space. So, we're locked down, but, I run workshops and I'm looking at starting a center and keep my channel going. And I'm just still really turned on to this whole scene of working with the body and emotions.
Awesome. Yeah. And so I'll give just a brief intro for your audience. The folks listening on my podcast are aware, but I came at this in kind of a similar angle and then with different nuances. But yeah, I started out with, I was interested in philosophy and religion all the time since I was a little kid, but then I ended up at some point diving into the occult and mystical books and even some groups and these kind of practices. But at some point I felt like something was missing, that I could perceive a depth there that I wasn't able to access. And I didn't know what that was, but I was doing yoga. I was doing, this sort of Kundalini yoga that was at the college I was at, kind of this light form of what you and I do. But nothing was getting me out of what I call the world of words. Now I recognize that there's a world of words, there's a world of the body. And then I found a teacher, Dr. Christopher Hyatt, and ended up meeting him, working with him directly, and then being essentially shattered out of the world of words, to the world of assumptions and who I thought I was up to that point. And so that started a journey that's kind of been going on for the last 20 years almost now. And I worked on myself quite a bit with that, and then kind of graduated into working with people, and it was a natural, organic transition. So I've been doing that ever since then. And I kind of abandoned a lot of the mystical and occult sort of side of things in favor of direct experience and in favor of using basic body-based or observation-based terminology. So instead of words like chakras or this kind of thing, I'll use just what's going on if I ask you to pay attention to this part of your body, or I'm pointing to my forehead for those listening on audio, or what's going on in your throat. What happens if we loosen your throat and now have you sing a little bit, or I'll do things that are only verifiable and easy to transfer in English. And I found that makes the work a lot easier. So that kind of forms the foundation of my approach to these things, is that I restrict myself to language that is understandable and then easy to experiment with or to test, as opposed to asking someone to accept something on faith or to accept words that now we have to translate, understand why they were translated in a specific way, and so on. So I try to cut it back down to basics. But if I had to describe my approach to evolution and or transcendence, it would be coming back home to the body before anything else can happen, getting back to that foundation, confronting and ending the fake suffering that's created by the mind, And then finally, to completely embrace life as an open-ended, never-ending adventure. Open-ended, never-ending adventure, in which there's really nothing for you to live up to except the missions that you set for yourself. So in those three components, I find you can destroy a lot of the restrictions and a lot of the suffering that people find themselves going through. And it can happen a lot faster than talk therapy, and not to dismiss talk therapy, it has a place, but when it's used alone, I find that it can't penetrate certain areas. And even if it does, it takes a long time and a sustained effort and a lot of money to do so. So that's kind of my approach. And then I include adventure and creativity, where I find a lot of therapists don't necessarily. I try to get people going on painting or drawing or music or singing or some other form of expression, and then also exploration out into the woods and out into various cognitive experiments, and then adventures in the world, adventures with other people, adventures with social dynamics and that kind of stuff. So what I see is a well-rounded approach that I don't see a lot of other people or therapists. There's not enough time for them to do it, or there's not enough motivation, or they themselves haven't explored those other realms. But I see that I like to try to create or facilitate a person becoming like a Renaissance man or woman, maybe I'm defining that term a little differently, but that they see a personal Renaissance in their life of like, oh, I forgot I used to love painting, for example, or when I break apart the tension in my chest, when I play guitar, everything is different now. These types of things. So I like to see it expand into every part of their life.
Yeah, man. I mean, it reminds me, like, something I often bang on about a little bit is like how therapy itself needs to undergo quite a renaissance as well, because I mean, if anyone has studied like characterology or related things, and the idea that we can start to dissociate even in the womb, a second trimester or whatever, and then that can create a personality who's very adept mentally, but, not really in touch with their body, sense of body or their emotions so much. And if you look at becoming like a mainstream therapist in the UK, I mean, I studied with Osho centers, which were like totally underground, but like you look at becoming like a mainstream therapist, then you're probably looking at doing like a degree in clinical psychology and then going to a PhD. That's like six years of work. And most of what you'll need is like a really good mind. You'll need a really good mind that is good at learning stuff all about the history and all the new approaches and CBT and blah, 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 DBT, whatever, and things. And it's all kind of good, but it churns out people who are, usually cerebrally very effective, but emotionally not so in touch as a general rule, and physically not really so present in their bodies. And I guess because, Britain's always had a lot of intellectual people, and always created a lot of this kind of personality type. And then if I think like, okay, if someone wanted to be like an engineer and build a bridge, then of course you'd want them to be, pretty good at maths. If you were going to travel on the bridge, you would want to think it's not going to fall down, So, you want them to be pretty intellectual. If you're going to get on a ship or an airplane, you want it to be built by someone who's really got a strong intellect.
Yeah.
But if you actually, and the same principle has kind of passed over into the area of therapy and psychoanalysis and medicine, but in some areas of medicine, it's totally valid, but in other areas like psychology, it's really not so valid. But there's no acknowledgement of that to be a good therapist, you need, okay, it's great, you've got some intellectual capacity, and that you could do a dissertation or whatever, but it's actually quite important that you can feel your heart and that you have some form of center in your belly, it's like these things are at least equally important. So it's kind of left the therapy scene very, as I see it, crammed up into a kind of, the potential scene is big and it's all crammed up into a small area, and
yeah, and there's some kind of pretentiousness to it among, not everybody, but among some of the practitioners. There's a sense of like an inflated ego of being a healer or being a hero of some type, which I think then blinds them to some of the other opportunities or options out there. My personal approach is and I'll make divisive posts about this kind of stuff, but like I think psychiatry itself it essentially functions as a criminal organization. And that's the way I see it. You know, it's a massive organization who's propped up on drug dealing, legalized drug dealing, because they have the money and the clout to force through legalization of drugs that, if they were on the street, would be massively illegal and seen as destructive as fentanyl. Some of those, you know, I've had many personal friends who died of, you couldn't quite say overdose, but you could say that their life started spiraling downward as soon as they started taking Klonopin or started taking any one of these meds. When I looked at the case history that they've shared with me, there was never any lead up to this drug. You know, there was just a meeting, maybe 15-20 minutes with a psychiatrist, and then suddenly they're on the strongest drug imaginable. And meanwhile, they ban other substances which were shown, which are now being shown to help with PTSD and to help with marriage and family relations, such as MDMA, which is being used in the US now with soldiers, and psilocybin, which is also now being used with soldiers. And so I see psychiatry as having a massive influence on people's perception of what's possible in the world of therapy or feeling better. And it's like, nothing else was tried before they get on this drug. And then if someone comes to me and they're on that drug, it's going to be a harder road for them to get to their original goal than if they had never seen the psychiatrist in the first place. So I see it in some ways as a criminal enterprise. Not every practitioner, okay, because I know very earnest practitioners who never prescribed anything and who treat their patients very well. But as a whole, psychiatry forced its way into the medical establishment. So if you look at the history of it, it forced its way in with a lot of money and a lot of social clout. When I don't think it belongs there. I don't believe in mental illness. I side with someone like Thomas Szasz, who wrote The Myth of Mental Illness, and demonstrated how this was created, this perception, to the point where now people are on the drugs and I'll question it. And then they'll say, well, I have a chemical imbalance. And I'm like, did your psychiatrist check the chemicals in your brain? And they're like, well, no. And then I said, well, was he part of an actual study that checked those brain chemicals? No. I'm like, see, he's on a Google search. I mean, essentially, or he heard that and now he's repeating it. Now everyone repeats it as though it's true. But the inverse could be true. Maybe the state you're in then mirrors what chemicals are going to be present in your brain. And if you were to change the physical state, then the presentation of what's going on in the brain may also be different. So it's arguable that they're asserting causation when it's just correlation, which is the basic premise of psychology, you know, science. So I find there's core fundamental errors in the foundation that psychiatry is built upon, and some of those have to be destroyed in the mind of my clients. And I don't even say patients; I say clients. I don't use the term therapy. I use the term like adventure or workshop or exploration or evolution. Simply because when a person comes looking for healing, they have a priori assumption that they are broken. Whereas someone like Milton Erickson would say, like, you're not broken and you already have all the tools you need. I just have to free up your access to them. And your awareness that you have those tools already, and get over the idea that you're broken and that someone else can fix you.
I mean, it's great to be able to, you know, and of course the challenge for people always is to take responsibility for themselves, you know, when we've got a society around us which is kind of quite happy to say, we'll fix it for you, but you'll have to pay, you know, and so we can kind of outsource our need to take responsibility. But I mean, with psychiatry, I'm not such a hardliner, really. I guess I lived about 17 years in a spiritual community where for a large chunk of the end of that time, we were putting on a lot of intense therapeutic process work, you know, and this sort of group, about 4 therapists, 4 of us living there doing that. And my role mostly was to assess people who were coming from a psychiatric background, because quite a few of them are attracted to work with in a more alternative way, particularly people from bipolar background or history of psychotic episodes, that kind of thing. And so I'd have to kind of assess them, and I'm not a psychiatrist, as to whether it would be suitable for them. And I mean, I kind of learned somewhere along the line from dealing with some of the more what might be considered traditionally heavy cases, but there is a role for medication, and some people cannot easily get back in the body. And for whatever reason, they're triggered out very quick. And for sure, maybe, you know, if the culture was different but was bringing us up or something like that, it would change. But I kind of, I somewhere from my own experience understood that, yes, psychiatry is a long way from perfect, but also it does develop, and also that some people do need meds. Some people, at least for a while, need meds. That was my own personal perception. I could be wrong, but that was what, when I started to meet people who were, you know, full on history of bipolar disorder, and I could see that the therapeutic approach of trying to get them back in the body, even slowly, it was not working, because the kind of neuroceptive facility, as soon as a certain level of unconscious feeling is stimulated, they're just in huge anxiety and they just have to get out. And, you know, they did not really have the awareness to stay in. And you can work at certain muscle groups to try and support that. But also for some people, they probably do need medication. And that's just kind of, if a society were different and better, then I think it would be different. But, you know,
that's interesting. It does speak to the societal structure, because the same, at least in my limited amount of anthropological research, the same conditions in the individual could be present, maybe lesser so if they hadn't grown up in an armored society, but same conditions could be present, say, in a Nepalese farmer or you know, New Guinea tribesmen or something, but their approaches to it is like, one example is like, they would do what we would call shaming, but it was kind of like everyone meet together and laugh at the person whose behavior was out, you know, not congruent with the tribe. And then that person would kind of be like, oh yeah, okay, that's right, I don't have to do that. Like, and there's different, you know, tribal pressures that are healthy, whereas now it's, you know, can be skewed in all different directions. The issue, and I hear totally what you're saying about the meds are necessary for some people, and that's a line that a lot of people use. The issue I still take with it is that it might be necessary because psychiatry has created the perception that it's necessary for so long that people don't have access to other routes. You know what I mean? And that's why I would say, okay, it's a criminal organization, because it forces a frame of interpretation on a person's behavior. Whereas if we said, okay, that person's having an extreme experience that's making them completely incongruent with what they need to do to get by in a given society, but what would have happened if they had access to, you know, a proper talk therapist and some marijuana, for example? Would that have prevented the need for Klonopin, which Klonopin is going to actually block their ability to get back into the body until they're able to get off the Klonopin? And now you're dealing with an addiction issue and a withdrawal issue that can lead to suicide. You know, even on the box of most of the medication itself, it says can raise incidence of suicide. So
I mean, yeah, you know, I mean, psychiatry is a long way from being a perfect profession. You know, if you follow this guy, Scott. He's famous. He was Scott Anderson, I think he calls himself, but he was the guy. He had a huge thing called Slate Star Codex. I don't know if you ever heard of it.
No, never heard of him. Huh.
He was like a social commentator and psychiatrist. And then the New York Times, he was so popular, he made this amazing piece called Meditations on Moloch about 2014.
Oh wow!
The kind of collapse of industrial civil. What was, and it was brutal, you know, and it was beautiful. And he was such a kind of famous writer in the underground that eventually came out he was also a mainstream psychiatrist or something. And then the New York Times said they were going to name him because so many people were interested in this, and he freaked out. And now he's on Substack writing as a psychiatrist. He's an interesting dude, you know. I mean, so I follow him. But certainly there are the kind of, you know, the classic kind of psychiatrists that I think you see in, like, you know, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest or whatever, you know, that kind of thing. And there is the for-profit thing. And I mean, for me, it's also interesting to reflect, like, what happened if, like, you know, if Reich had actually kind of held it together and somehow managed to make his therapeutic approach, which was really hot in the 30s, you know, if he hadn't kind of lost it in certain ways or depending on what perspective you take. And I'm not an expert on Reich's history or character, but, you know, what would have happened if that had been accepted more into the mainstream, if people started to work on muscle armoring, if they started to work on their eyes, on feeling, on being alive, on having good orgasms, I mean, what would happen if psychiatry had gone in that direction? Because, Reich was a student of Freud. He was highly looked upon, and he arrived in the States to flee the kind of Nazi things going on in Europe and stuff. And initially he was like super popular from what I can gather. I haven't read Myron Sharaf's book or super studied, but like, and he had some utterly amazing theories, and then somewhere it all went a bit wrong with orgone and stuff and Einstein and whatever. And he ended up in prison and died, but like, kind of, what would have happened if Reich had actually kind of been accepted a bit more widely, and it could have been amazing.
It could have been, yeah. And that's what you and I and others are doing now. It's not gonna ever go away, because at least from my perspective, what it represents, at least my core principle of how I would work with anybody and how I would conduct myself and how I make life decisions is, does it support or promote or unblock the free and spontaneous flow of life force, either in the individual, in society, or in nature? So if I'm questioning myself, am I going to put a dam on this stream on my land? The answer will be no. But if I say, am I going to put a small water, movement generator of electricity into that stream? The answer will be yes. You see what I mean? The free flow of life force. But it would be an easy answer for me. I'm not going to debate anything about it, because that's how I'll make the decision. So in business as well, if I go down some bizarre road of learning some type of marketing and suddenly I feel like, oh, I'm getting all tense even thinking about this, and this isn't good, because already I'm not even living what my principle is. But because of, I think that life wants to flow. Like it's pretty evident if I go out into nature, if I, there's no way you can stop nature. You can divert it, you can try to block it, but it just goes around, it just keeps doing its thing. And I think that's there in people. And then of course, what Wright called armoring starts to happen, where it blocks the free and spontaneous flow. And then people react when they are confronted with that free flow with anger and or fear. And so we see that on a mass level, like you were talking before we started recording, that some people were begging the government for lockdowns. And in some way, that's an unconscious reaction to free and spontaneous flow of life. People who already stay home all the time and don't like to see sort of the kids yelling in the streets or big rock concerts, life just exuding from all around. Now those people have an avenue to control others who they don't even know, and they're doing it, on the surface level, they think it's because of a disease or it's because of fear or anger, but they would have wanted this same lockdown 10 years ago. They just didn't have any way to hurt. It would have been absurd if they said all rock concerts should be closed, but now they can say it and they're taken seriously. So I think we see like the armoring has become more public and people are more aware of their armoring and they're reacting to it. And I'm an optimist about this. It could be seen like, oh, things are going in the wrong direction, but I trust in the free and spontaneous flow of life. So I think the armor becoming conscious, even though it seems like sort of a restrictive situation right now, means that when you bring awareness to tension in the body, it can feel at first like, oh man, I'm more tense than I was before. Even though you're not more tense, you're aware of the tension that was unaware.
Yeah.
But that means the awareness itself starts to alleviate the tension. So maybe we're seeing that in society now.
One of the kind of, from that, riffing on that a little bit, it's like one of the kind of emergent understandings I've had of humanity is coming out of the kind of the myth of what used to be called the happy savage, which was like a kind of concept in the West that a lot of kind of upright males would tend to have. They would be doing their job and providing for their family and stuff and doing the whole thing, but they'd have this dream that there was like really happy races somewhere of people not doing any of this shit and living hunter-gatherer existences. And my personal perception is that if you actually went to those cultures, you'd probably find them quite rigid in their own way. You'd probably find all sorts of drama going on, and maybe it wouldn't be quite as bad as living in Ruislip and having 2.4 kids, but there's a tendency to kind of blame instead of seeing that, panning back, the whole history of the West is based around the development in certain areas of the frontal cortex. Somewhere around 1 to 5 million years ago, working with information became useful in terms of furthering our evolutionary goals, of how to live, how to stay alive, how to have kids and reproduce, how to attack and defend, and this kind of thing. And so somehow the whole frontal lobe started to develop and develop, and we came out of being like Homo australianus or chimpanzees and shit, and developed these huge frontal lobes, and with that came a lot of problems. And then somewhere maybe from the agricultural revolution about 10,000 years ago, we then started to have this capacity, and it happened to white men first, for extremely objective modes of consciousness, where basically you had a really hardened sense of subject-object boundaries, whereas like probably for man earlier than that, the subject-object boundary was more diffuse. It was more of a meditative experience to be alive. And somewhere the neural architecture started to develop around the time of the agricultural revolution, which led slowly towards, basically to white men suddenly having this very kind of hardened, objective view of the world, which enabled them to exploit the shit out of everybody else, basically, to build boats initially, which could travel around the world, and weapons and strategies and all sorts of stuff for the British initially to create a massive, great empire. I'm not really good at history, but like the 17th century or something like that. And now we've ended up with kind of civilization, so to speak, in the West from all of this hardened objectivity. But of course, there is a kind of price in that now we're at a point where, one, a lot of people are becoming increasingly pissed off with white men, basically, and you see it in cancel culture or whatever, and why are white men controlling everything or whatever, and they're pissed off with that, but also, they're looking for people to blame, and they also want more freedom in the body instead of just this existence of kind of, work, this highly objectified existence where everything is kind of mechanistic. The mechanistic structures actually gave us a lot for quite a long time, and they were so powerful they pushed Reich out of the way, basically, and his kind of theories for changing it. And the systematic traumatization of kids has probably gone on since time immemorial, and all cultures perpetuate themselves through some form of systematic traumatization. But in the West, it's been particularly strong in certain forms. Creating dreamer schizoids makes really good inventors.
Right.
Creating widgets makes people who really hold up a structure really well, and makes an army really powerful. But now everybody's kind of blaming and blaming and blaming. But the kind of, to me, the higher ground somewhere, which I also blame like crazy, but the higher ground is like, okay, we're in this position on the globe, so where are we now going? Where are we now going? Are we going just into like, more and more mechanistic AI stuff, or are we going to start to come back into the body, the heart, and things like that? It's like, I don't know, just riffing a little bit off what you were saying.
It makes sense, and I think about these things as well. Yeah, and in a certain sense, I'm a champion of the individual and sort of the hero's journey in the Joseph Campbell sense, in the quest for the Grail being an individual thing that is available to each person. So that I, in some sense, I will reduce history and the history of civilization and everything that came before it, and in current events, down to how does it affect the pioneer, meaning the individual who is facing it and pioneering themselves and their life through it. So I'll reduce it to that level simply because it's useful for the individual to reframe everything from that perspective, to loosen the hold of the storyline. Like, even if someone was put into prison, they could still be the star of that movie. You know what I mean? And can evolve and can transcend whatever the physical conditions are. First, the tensions in their own body, and then the external restrictions, or the appearance of external restrictions, which only exist insofar as on an interpretive level or on a mental level. Yes, you can be restrained, physically restrained, but you cannot be, and this is where the psychiatric drugs are really problematic, because if you're mentally restrained by drugs to the point that you can't function, that could be where my theory falls apart a little bit. But I think even then, if you were lobotomized, that there's still some aspect of transcendence or an evolution that can take place, or self-actualization, even in that condition. And I've seen it in so-called severely mentally challenged people that I paid attention to long enough to where I was like, oh, this person is more advanced on a certain level than any of us right now, and I caught wind of it, and I saw it in their face, and I heard it in the way they were perceiving the world around them, where they even perceived the people around them as not getting what they get, and were kind of gentle about it with them. Like, you guys can treat me this way because I get that you're not really seeing what's going on, there's something amazing about that. But you can hear the cathedral bells in the background here striking noon, so it'll be 12 of them, but we chose just the right time.
That's nice.
Yeah, it is nice. I like it's a little pattern interrupt for us and the listeners. Noon
I
on
remember
it.
in Holland, in Amsterdam, we used to have a lot of bells, and they'd go off half the night. In the 90s, I'd go over there and get wasted at weekends, but the bells would be driving you nuts, all these different churches. But in England, it's not so, I don't know, it doesn't seem to be quite so much.
Yeah, I love this one. I moved over here kind of near that on purpose, and it is all night. I don't wake up from it, but I do like it when I hear it. There's an exercise that some philosophers, and I heard about it through E.J. Gold, who's an author and friend, but it was that every hour for the rest of your life, set an alarm, and even wake up in the middle of the night, set an alarm, and look back at the previous hour and see, was I fully alive? Am I really present? Am I aware of my own mortality right now? And if not, then adjust for the next hour. And then again, the alarm hits. So when I hear the church bells, I take it as that, like, oh, what was I just doing? Was I present? Am I aware of what's going on right now? Am I using the time?
That's cool.
The answer is often no, but at least I get another chance. Get another shot at it. So yeah, I kind of turned to the church bells into my personal alarm system. But that speaks to what I was just getting at, is I'm sort of an individualist, and maybe that's from growing up in America. I don't know. But I still feel that for a person to be a functional part of society, they first have to be an individualist and honor themselves and get what they need, or they're going to start getting what they need in weird ways from society and using people and doing these different things. So you handle the individual first, get yourself what you need, put on your oxygen mask first on the plane, and then help others. And being aware of that, then I find people can start to become a more a better contribution to the people around them, to the society around them. And I'm learning that right now. Like, being here, I started to realize I was working online all the time, working with clients that aren't from Croatia, and then I'm like, just sort of like an implant here. And I thought, well, actually, so I start to try to talk to everyone I meet, and I like to buy my food from the local farmers and have some connection to where I actually live, because now it's possible that you can live somewhere and have zero connection with anybody ever, and just function online. Or even if you worked at one business here, you could just have connection with those people and never do anything else. But I would actually like to, if I'm at a bar having a beer and some guy comes up and feels okay to talk to me about his issues or whatever is going on for him, I want to be present and help send him back off into his life better off than where we started, And in that way, I'm looking at doing more business here, even though economically it wouldn't, if I'm only calculating numbers, it doesn't make sense. I might as well get dollars or euros or Canadian dollars than kunas, just because the economics of it don't make sense. But on the community level, it serves me to make sure that everyone I come in contact with has a little taste of that free and spontaneous flow of their own life force, and know and feel the goodness of it. And that's going to make my life better. It's going to make the community better. They're going to go back off and treat someone else in a new way. And I see the effects of it, So I think handling yourself and then handling the people around you, and in that way, promoting that principle. And it starts when I'm consciously aware of that, it starts to make, like, I know business owners here, I know bar owners, because I love to know the owners of, they know more things about what's going on in their city, and they have to function as a part of their community, or their business won't work. So if I can affect them on a positive level, then they affect all their customers on that positive level. Then I get to enjoy the benefits of that by going to visit those pubs or cafes, So in recent years, I've had more of a community mindset, but I had to be an individualist to get there. I had to deal with myself and deal with my own issues to actually get to the point where I could help somebody else on that level, you know.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, in my own, that's beautiful actually, you know, but like in my own journey therapeutically, you know, I did a lot of group therapy with an Osho center in Holland. And, you know, that was really, you're just really thrown into a maelstrom, you know, sometimes 30-day workshops with 200 people, you know, and like, I think the first one of those I did, we had 78 hours of sleep in the 30 days in total, you know, and just like, and you're just hurled into both individuality and the group, you know, what, you know, like encounter therapy is where people give all their reflections about your personality directly to you, and you give your reflections back to them, and then you go into all the emotions and stuff like that. And it was such a kind of maelstrom. I somewhere came to understand that part of being human is that we are kind of suspended between these poles of like individuality, who we are as an individual and who we are as a part of society. And like, you know, the mind can't kind of work it out or something, but you just have to crash into those bits and sometimes really stand up for yourself and sometimes really do something for the group or whatever, you know. It's like,
Yeah.
hard to get my head around, you know. It's like it challenges the mind on a very deep level. Like I can't really work it out with my mind, you know?
Right. And that's an important point right there. And I don't know that it ever has to be worked out in the mind unless you're going to go into writing about it or teaching about it or being a philosopher. So this is a super interesting point. Like I mentioned earlier, that I see it's useful to use this concept of two worlds. Now we can get into the occult, we can get into a million worlds, and I can talk about them all day, but I don't know how useful they are. But the two worlds model that I like to use is there's the world of words, meaning abstractions, concepts, ideas, this abstract world. That's at least one layer and usually multiple layers removed from direct physical experience. And then there is the world of the body. I like to say the world of the body, but it could be called the world of direct experience or the world of direct perception. And many people are trapped solely in the world of words. And I've heard a Christian speaker and radio show host who I really like describe it as the present moment is the kingdom of heaven. The inner world in the present moment is the kingdom of heaven, accessible at all times, never went anywhere. And then this world of words, the world of ideas, is the world created by Satan, meaning it spins you into any kind of interpretations that you believe to be true. And then due to that belief, the body reacts with tension and physical reactions, hormonal reactions, as if that world is real. So this is how you could have a person sitting on a street corner in the sun, their rent is paid, they've had enough food to eat, they have people who care about them, and yet they're melting down. They're melting down and afraid of some catastrophe happening in the future sometime, and their body is literally reacting with tension as if that catastrophe is happening now. So they're not present to what's actually happening, even though we're sitting in so-called the kingdom of heaven, but believing they are in hell. And this also correlates with the Buddhist idea of samsara, the world of samsara, the world of suffering. But later you find samsara and nirvana are the same place. You know what I mean? And so I believe samsara is this spinning wheel created in the mind that it can be gigantic, it can be huge, but it actually doesn't physically exist except in the tension of the people who believe it to exist. And then their interactions with other people will be as if that world exists, which then gives the other people the ability to believe that that world is real as well. And so you can spread this sort of intellectual disease. It passes between people. It's contagious. Now, Reich called it emotional plague. Charles Konia has done extensive research and writing on that, how the emotional plague spreads around the globe. And how then the physical armor spreads from person to person through mimicking and through normalization of these tense states. So when I work with a group, for example, I have in mind to normalize the sense of transcendence, meaning dropping the world of the mind and becoming present, and then reevaluating everything from this present moment, reevaluating everything from provable, observable facts about what's happening right now in contradiction to whatever you were thinking prior to that. And I've seen people go from they describe themselves as being autistic and they can't dance, they can't tell stories. And within 2 minutes, I had those people dancing, telling stories and doing art. Whereas prior they've been told and they believe they could never, ever do those because they had a disease. And just for me saying, okay, well, whatever that is, maybe you have that, but let's set that aside right now. Can you tap your foot? Can you tap your foot to that rhythm? Oh yeah, I can tap my foot. I was like, okay, cool. Can you move that whole leg? Yeah, I can move the whole leg. Great. Can you move like both legs maybe? And they're like, yeah, I can move both legs. And within moments they were dancing around the room, you know. But if I would have said, you have to dance, you know, they're going to get armored and more armored. So I just use the physical data that's present that no one can deny. You know, I'm not going to argue against the diagnoses. I'm not going to try to deal with it. I'm not going to even make it a part of the conversation. Instead, I'm going to say, what can we do right now with what's physically present? You know, do you have a pen? Yes. Do you have a piece of paper? Yes. Can you move the pen around the paper? Okay. Yeah. Now you can draw. Whereas moments earlier, you said you can't. You know what I mean? So the world of words makes us think, I'm not an artist. I can't draw. I can't sing. And it erects these huge standards of comparison. So an artist is this, a person who can draw is that, a singer is this, you know, and then physically they believe it to be true and then restrict themselves. But none of that was ever true. It was just a physical tension and a bunch of ideas. So I find if you destroy the right ideas, find the linchpins to this, find the ones that are erecting the whole structure of illusion, and the person is thrust back into the present moment, but also in a way that makes their abilities instantly accessible, you know. So I like to try to normalize that experience, and then I find it'll bring the people who are more lost in the mind, when they're in a group that's happening, they suddenly become at ease communicating about their life, telling stories about their life. Whereas if I was talking to them alone, it might take a lot longer. You know? So I find there's hacks, so to speak. I don't like to use that word because it doesn't sound, it's not as, I mean, this can have long-term results. It's not just a hack, like for temporary purposes, but you can't unring those bells. If a person now feels like they can draw, they'll never be able to convince themselves again of that lie. And where I find the problem with the diagnoses and psychology itself, the terminology, especially the DSM, you know, they'll throw these terms around as if they are true in the world of words. You have anxiety, you have an anxiety disorder. And I'm like, it's better if we never had that word. What if parents told their kids as they're growing up, the kid says, oh, I have some feeling in my belly and I'm scared and my throat is tense. And the parent says, oh, this means we need to go to the woods. Let's go out to the woods, you know, and whenever you feel that way, let's get out to the woods and see what happens. It means you need to run around. It means there's unused fun inside you that needs to be accessed. You know, if we use those terms instead and not put a negative valence around the physical event that people have been trained to call anxiety, then no one has an anxiety disorder. They have a body event that's occurring that could have a very easy solution. So when I meet people, I have to destroy first those concepts. So that's why I say, okay, anxiety doesn't exist, but tell me what you're feeling right now. What you're feeling, what you're experiencing does exist. And then each person says something wildly different, you know, and it doesn't have a negative valence. Tension in the belly doesn't have a negative valence. It's just an experience. From there, I can say, okay, let's do the gag reflex. Let's do paradoxical breathing and loosen up the diaphragm, you know. The person says, I have panic attacks. So I say, well, panic attacks don't really exist. I get why you say that because you've seen it on TV and your friends did it. But what happens if you do the gag reflex every day? And then they report back to me, never had another panic attack again. So panic attack is diaphragm tensing and then breath and then interpretations. The brain says, oh, man, the diaphragm's tense. Something's really wrong out here. But of course, the brain only has the body to observe. So if you,
it has its concepts, and then it, you know, it creates like a feedback loop, you know, in the same way as putting a speaker near a mic causes this hideous howling sound, you know, and then with panic attacks, the person just goes round and round. But you know what you're saying to me, you know, it also points to, you know, a fundamental kind of principle in the kind of therapeutic approach I use is basically to clear just enough stuff out of the way for sufficiently long for the person to have a taste of just being present with themselves, because there is this baseline layer of consciousness, you know, that is kind of non-dual and is not, you know, that's there all the time and is not really, you know, yes, these thoughts and ideas and emotions and everything appear in it, but they're not really, you know, they're not really the defining state. And with psychiatry or modern psychology, mostly what you're looking to do I mean, these days in more enlightened times, is to try and, make the person more socially functional, maybe, or
Yeah.
whatever. And that's all okay, I think, but I mean, sometimes it gets really lost. And also there is a tendency, because the people themselves in psychiatry and clinical psychology tend to be so mind-centered, they have less, themselves experience of just basic presence.
Yeah.
And so they themselves are unaware of this kind of vast healing balm that exists inside everybody all the time.
Right.
But they don't really have access to it for themselves. So they themselves are a bit over-focused on trying to make the mind right in some way, to feel good or to have a good self-image or whatever, all of which are not bad things to do, but which, there's a kind of overlooking of this huge reservoir inside, and I was inspired to see, like in the British medical system, the National Health Service, that mindfulness became popular for some areas of stress reduction, some area of working with chronic pain, and some with people who are, basically with untreatable conditions, where the medical service themselves actually started to, realizing that the drugs weren't really working, or they were too expensive for certain clinics or areas, just started to adopt mindfulness from this American guy, John Kabat-Zinn, who started to write about it. I think he was a clinical psychologist or something like that. And, that's kind of inspiring to see. And in many ways, the bodywork practices that I give to people are really just an extension of that. Once you are aware of the body, and once you've got some ability to just kind of be with the sense of the body, this very kind of basic, not very exciting, unshareable sensation that we have. Once you've got that, you can then start to open up certain muscle groups, and staying in that, you can get more sense of the body, and the sense of the body can be itself quite a spiritual journey, not one that involves thoughts or even emotions necessarily, but just a certain depth of presence is slowly created in someone. And then, gradually the kind of things that are habitually bothering their mind just kind of dissolve away slowly. And they may still run, but there's not much charge there underneath to kind of to deal with it,
Yeah. Yeah. If you doubt every thought, if you doubt every thought and the validity of it, you're left with something else that's guiding your life. Left with having to confront, what is this? Like I mentioned how I moved to Osijek. It wasn't some plan I could have made to move to Croatia. I couldn't have known it existed. So there's some other factor in reality that provides some form of guidance. It didn't send me running off a cliff. It didn't, it's like, and I've had those moments. Some people call them synchronicity. As far as I can tell, the whole thing runs on, all of reality itself runs on what's called synchronicity, but we need the words like synchronicity get developed by people that are in a segregated state, meaning they're not at one, they don't see themselves at one with the whole. So then when they snap into that oneness with the whole, they go, oh, this correlates with this, correlates with this, correlates with me. That's a synchronicity. To me, they've just become aware of the mechanics of reality itself. And it's always functioning that way. And we get a skewed view of it because the news presents life as though it's catastrophe all the time. But the real news, if it was proportionate to actual events in the world, every night the real news would have to say, today 99.9% of planes landed just fine, 99.9% of cars did not crash, and 99.9% of people did not kill each other for another day. How beautiful is that? But we're conditioned to think it's murder, 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 plane crash, plane crash, plane crash, car crash, devastation, catastrophe all the time. When you can walk around, I walk around outside, I cannot find violence happening. You can in certain cities, of course, but it's a tiny, tiny percentage of things going on that are catastrophe, when the majority of what's actually happening in the world is not catastrophic.
Well,
and
that's,
yet we think of it that only in the world of the mind can it be perceived that way.
Well, that's unquestionably true, but I guess what I see happening is that, yes, you can appeal to reason in that way, and say, look, come on, guys, the whole world is not like blowing up all over the place. And actually there's tons of really good stuff happening and it's pretty peaceful or whatever. But I guess how I see it is like increasingly out in the world has become like an attention economy, where whatever you pay attention to means more stuff can be sold to you or whatever. So whether you're a mainstream media network or whether you're a social media network like Facebook, or like I say, whether you're Rupert Murdoch and News Corp or whatever, you need to get people's attention. That's how you survive in the space as a media outlet. You need to get their attention. And what gets their attention is governed by our evolutionary history and our evolutionary biology, and essentially our evolutionary psychology that emerges from that. So, any sign of conflict or sex, and our attention is attracted. I got a girlfriend, but if I walk down the street and there's a pretty blonde woman, my mind is like going there, and because there's just it's just written in there. It's written into the system. And if there's conflict or fighting, or if I hear fighting, a couple of drunken teenagers on the front starting to kind of square off, then you're attracted in there, because we've come from evolution, and if we're in this kind of for-profit, constant growth environment, it kind of comes down to like game theory at the end of the day, where it's very easy to get into what they call a like race to the bottom, where all the media outlets are just dragging you right to the base of your brainstem and the most primitive survival instincts in order to maintain your attention, to try and get advertising to sell you stuff. And that's kind of the situation I see ourselves in now. It's all called a multipolar trap. And it's like, so, how do we actually get out of that situation? So that we're not like in America. I mean, I'm not American. I've got some friends there, quite a few, but in the last year of the kind of Trump administration, and with COVID, it was coming at times. It looked, to my perspective, like a little bit close to almost civil war, with just huge tribes of people starting to be created, mostly by social media, really, and the way memes were being presented, and QAnon and whatever. And so because of this attention economy and because of the for-profit constant growth algorithm, basically you're going to drive people into a full-blown civil fucking war almost. And it's like, how do we get out of this shit?
That's fascinating. Yeah. It is crazy, man. Like living in Croatia for a couple of years, and I've been to Serbia and Bosnia and Montenegro, and the term comes from here, balkanization, where you split a population up of people who speak the same language, have essentially very similar cultures, and then set them at war with each other, and so you see the balkanization of the US happening. I don't think it at all began with Trump. You could start to trace it back. When I grew up in Minnesota, the racism, and I've hitchhiked all over the US, and racism was not a huge issue. Now you could say, well, you're white, you wouldn't see it, but I was tuned into that, and I used to consider myself a protester and anti-racist and all this kind of stuff. But in terms of racist countries, I wouldn't say the US was a racist country. I mean, and the people that are screaming it the most have risen to the heights of power. So you have someone like Obama saying America is a racist country, and yet he's the most powerful man in the world when he's president. So there's some issue there. There's some cognitive dissonance happening when you can be the highest paid athletes, you can be the highest, the most, the most powerful man in the world, and then claiming that the black man can't make it in the US. Something's wrong with that statement. I don't want to get into details about it, but I'm saying.
Well, I mean, it's a comparison, I think, that's how I'm mixed race myself. I look mostly white, but except when it's very sunny. But I mean, like, Southeast Asia, you've got absolute endemic racism in a lot of countries.
Well, yeah, China has concentration camps with.
Darker your skin is, the lower down the scale you are. And maybe in Britain it's not quite so overt in some ways, but I would still personally consider the UK to be a highly racist country in many ways, and that is my perception of it. And and it is changing, and I think it's also to be commended in, but many ways it does a pretty good job of trying to change from where it's been at. But yeah, and comparatively, say to Thailand, no, it's not racist at all compared to Thailand, which is like, it's just absolutely structured into the culture. But
like China, like I said, they'll kill their own people in the mass numbers, and they will. You can see drone footage of concentration camps with the Muslim Uyghurs being held there, organ harvesting and all kinds of stuff, and then yet the West ignores it because there's business to be done. I think if I'm correct, Switzerland's the only country in Europe or in the world, as far as I know, that refuses to do business with China. based
Really?
on ethical concerns. Yeah.
Right.
And so you see the world turning a blind eye to that. Well, China's gained, I think they're like the number one economy right now, if I'm not incorrect. And we may look back 40 years from now if the victors are not on that side and say this was equivalent to like Nazi Germany times in a way, with these camps and with this stuff going on, and everyone just kind of ignoring it because
Yeah.
there's a dollar to be made, or a
Well,
pound.
this is, I mean, I don't know. I was meeting up with a friend of mine the other day, and she's anyway pissed off with guys, but like, she's raging about the whole capitalist system and that. And I'm just trying to say to her, well, yes, you can put it down to that, men and the white men and whatever, but like also, it's kind of like an algorithm, really. It's actually not that much to do with people. And that's the real problem, actually, because say I'm like the CEO of some big multinational cement company, and I've got like 5 competitors globally about my same level, and some scientist over somewhere, MIT or whatever, invents a new type of cement. But the problem with it is it's totally brutal to the environment, and the working conditions required to produce it are horrific for people. Now, I might say, well, I'm not going to, I'm CEO of this big dev cement company. I'm not going to use that technique. But then, of course, I start thinking about it, and it's like, oh shit, but what about the Chinese company or the American company or the German company? What if they do it? Then they'll be producing it cheaper and they can buy me out of the market. Or what if I refuse to do it and my own board of directors says, well, off you go, mate, we'll find someone who is going to do it because we need to maintain and compete. And what you see when you pull back from that is a system that cannot change except by some very major disruptive event happening to it, and this is going on in so many different areas of our society. In that, I was quite pro-capitalist and meritocracy for a long time, but now I actually see, it's really not working, the system. And actually, even if the environment, whether it is under threat right now or isn't right now, I don't know, but the way we're going is not really to do with humans and blaming humans, and that it's just really, really fucked, actually, when that, maybe it's my own psyche or whatever, but when I look at the future, I think, my God, it's either the whole thing just collapses and we die out, or AI takes over and starts to run shit with externalities figured in, or women take over and start to do something. But the way we're going is just, I just can't see us really surviving unless something can break out of this kind of for-profit thing, which is just grinding everything down to the lowest level all the time.
None of the options you mentioned sound too good to me, but
I don't mind the women taking over, and I'm kind of getting used to the AI thing. I've been exploring social credit systems and stuff like that, but I don't know. I mean, and
I think
it's kind of a shame, I mean, what I saw doing therapy a lot was, I'm doing a lot of group therapy. And the reason I'd gone to this organization was because the guys I met who were therapists there, they just were really kind of rocking, they were full of energy and they were doing stuff. And like, and other therapists I'd been to in London were like, just regular kind of, they were left-leaning, nice guys in their tweed jackets and reading The Guardian and stuff, and they were nice, but they weren't someone inspirational to me. And what I learned was that you could, because I hated hierarchies growing up. I was coming from broken adoption, abandonment, bad stuff going on at home, repeated hospitalizations, not meant to live, blah, blah, blah. The bottom line was I hated authority and structure and hierarchies. And I saw for the first time in my 40s that human hierarchies could work if you had the right kind of loving, powerful people in them. But I just never experienced a good hierarchy in my time.
Right, and think
So
of it,
then I thought, wow,
there right directly. We are all referring to the core authority and hierarchy, which is mom and dad. That's the first one that we're a part of. And if you had one where there's, and I even in some ways have learned to appreciate what was mocked in the 80s and almost forgotten now as traditional or conservative family values. And it's easy to laugh it out of the room, but if we go back and look what that might actually mean, I would love to see how I would have lived life had I been taught to treat sex in a different way, to not have promiscuity, and for women to not be taught that promiscuity is a good thing. And then they end up alone and hating men when they're 40, 50, 60 years old, and they can't pair bond with anyone because they've been ruined by their sexual experiences over time. And then you have a culture where the music, the movies, the TV shows, and then the magazines are pushing this promiscuous sexuality, but there's no holiness to it, no deeper connection to it, no acknowledgement that if you connect with a person sexually, that there's an energetic thing that stays connected, and if you do that so many times, what's going to happen? What is the results? And no one seems to be looking at that. But there's some people I've met who, I wouldn't say perfect parents, but close to perfect parents, let's say. And the way they function in life is so different, and the way they treat women is so different. These are guys I'm thinking of. But coming to terms with the mom and dad, of course, is at the root of all therapeutic processes. And people don't want to believe it. And I think a lot of the spirituality and a lot of systems and techniques end up being a distraction from dealing with that core issue of the mom and dad. And it's funny because it's there in the Bible. It's like, love your parents. It doesn't mean love your parents if they did right by you. It means forgive even the worst violation. If your dad, if your mom beat you up, cut you to cut off your arm, and then killed your dad and killed herself, forgive that. Forgive everything, because people cannot help what they do until there's some kind of consciousness, until there's some kind of awareness. And the proof of that is if I look back at my life and see what I've done that I knew was wrong when I was doing it, like I had some pang of conscience, and almost all the time I did. Because you can't say something's wrong if a person didn't know better. They just didn't know better. But if you know better and you still caught yourself taking an action that you knew was wrong, that means you couldn't help it. If you could have helped it, you would have done something different. So for me, facing that crushing realization of myself, like, shit, I did things and I couldn't help myself and I made excuses to do evil or wrong. At some point I realized I have to extend that awareness to my parents. And then from there, I have to extend that awareness to the rest of humanity. I can no longer judge people's actions. I can only attempt to understand them. Because even the billionaires destroying the environment or hurting other people still cannot help it. They're doing whatever they can do. If they knew better, they would do better. If they could do better, they would do better. So it doesn't mean don't deal with them. It doesn't mean don't stand up to wrongs that you see, but it means don't judge, don't carry hate in your heart. First for the parents and then for others, because none of us are any better. If you've done one wrong thing that you knew was wrong when you did it, then you'll realize, oh, everyone else is in that same situation.
Yeah. It's like, it took me, I had to do a lot of group room work to get to a place of forgiveness with certain people from my early childhood, but I totally agree that you have to be aligned in that direction. Otherwise you're just going into bitterness and blaming, basically. And, like they say, resentment is like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies, and it's like totally fucking true, basically,
And you'll end up justifying evil actions. This is where I just did a post on this, like the way evil propagates in the world is by justifying your own evil actions by saying everyone else is doing it. Be the fucking one person who doesn't. Maybe it won't have an impact, but at least you gave an example. Like, I'm not going to do that. Like, everyone else is, for example, out here, or certain places where the government is maybe corrupt, or the government is up to some nefarious activity, and people will be like, okay, I'm going to do all I can. I'm going to lie on these forms, and I'm going to take this money that they're offering, even though I don't qualify for it. I don't deserve it. Well, now you're justifying evil actions based on someone else's evil actions. Where does that end? Who's going to finally say, no, I won't do that. I'm going to have ethics. I'm going to do the right thing, even if it's difficult, even if I suffer as a result.
Do you think this, like, this whole COVID thing, that we've been in for like the last year is like on some, like magical extra dimensional level is like a kind of almost like the evil empire having a last go at getting people back into darkness or something? Do you relate to it in that way at all?
Kind of looks like that, man. I don't know for sure, but it does look like it. And like I said, the only healthy way I can respond to it, and I will refuse orders from on high if I see that they are unethical or that they're evil. I won't I'm in a weird situation. I have to behave myself and follow Croatian customs and law because I want to get citizenship here. So I wouldn't go make an example of myself, in the same way that I would if I was in California. I would open my business. If I was a bar owner in California, even if I was the only one, I would just keep opening it. Let them find me, let them take me to jail. I'd open it again and again and again and again because it's illegitimate authority. If my parents told me you can't hug your friends, you can't meet with your friends at the sandbox anymore, I'd be like, fuck you, mom and dad. I'm going to go to the sandbox and you can't tell me that. But now we're going to accept mommy and daddy government saying you can't open your business, you can't free associate. It's like, what value is life if you're just going to sit at home and rot and die? You might as well fucking defy that, because what good is your life if you can't connect with other people and they're telling you can't go down the street and go to your friend's house to have a barbecue? No, that doesn't compute for me at all. Have your barbecue, deal with the police, I guess. But and when they said if it was 2 weeks in the beginning, then it's 2 months, now it's a year, now they're saying forever. And you have people talking heads on the news like, we're going to get rid of the handshake, no more handshakes. I'm like, no, dude, you don't get to do this. We get this life, we have this body. It's always been subject to disease and death. You see these veterans who are like thinking this COVID thing is ridiculous because they're like, oh, I was raiding the beach at Normandy and I had the flu. What are you guys talking about? Like, what do you mean? Have we become so weak that disease is going to shut down the whole globe? So something else is happening that we don't have all the data on, because tuberculosis was rampaging around the world and no one's wearing a mask. The flu every year kills old people in nursing homes. I mean, it's always going on. It's that most people don't know the data and they don't know how statistics are used to manipulate. If they knew that information, they would be not able to be manipulated by this. They would instantly see right through it. But people don't know about statistics, and they don't know that about the statistics of heart disease, of cancer, of flu deaths. Every year, if you look up the last 10 years, the NHS in England, every year around flu season, they publish fear-mongering articles about overwhelming the NHS. But now this year they have the narrative, they have stolen control of the narrative. So everyone acts like they didn't for the last 20 years have the same articles. Every year they said, the hospitals are overwhelmed. Hospitals are overwhelmed. Like, look it up. Everyone listening, go look it up yourself. From 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, every flu season, all the newspapers in Britain are saying that the hospital system is overwhelmed. Just now this year, it happens
the
to
hospital system in the UK is always overwhelmed. When I went to visit my adopted mum, she had a long, drawn-out illness before she died. You could hardly park in the car park. It was always overwhelmed. There was like a queue of beds, just regardless of the season, basically with people on them dying in the corridors, waiting for someone to die in the ward so they could get there and die there.
Right, and now they're using COVID as
the British are kind of unhealthy, but like, I've had a bit of
but they don't say like, why were there no masks and lockdowns all those other years to save the NHS or the health system? So, and the other thing is, you can start to form an argument against socialized medical care right there, because there are certain aspects of it that don't work. They don't work. And I'm coming as an American saying this, but it's true. And I'm not the American way is any better, or it is for certain people, but I think we need a third option that's not 100%. Maybe 100% privatized would actually work. I know no one's ever tried it, but 100% socialized medical care means we're lowering the value of it for everyone on some level. There's a trade-off, and as far as like incentivizing sort of advanced research and cures, whereas now we're incentivizing never finding a cure and actually ignoring possible cures. And so we have with hydroxychloroquine, it's actually workable for people, but there was an incentive to make it look like it's not. So now we have weird social pressures that affect
totally. And what was also kind of amusing in a perverse way was like, because like Trump, was such a kind of divisive character, in the world, but certainly in America, and Trump had made some statement early on about hydroxychloroquine.
Yep.
But a lot of people basically just were totally against hydroxychloroquine.
I know, it's so weird. Try it.
Because Trump was talking about it and stuff, and I was like, whoa, that's now we're getting pretty fucking crazy. And like,
yeah.
And I kind of saw, I had a different journey with COVID. It was not so, I mean, when it first came, I was super into conspiracy theories 20 years ago, and I used to actually be riding in this scene a bit before I started doing therapy.
Mhm.
I had huge issues with authority from my adoptive father. I was going to see David Icke and stuff like this,
Yeah.
and I kind of worked through a lot of that authority stuff. And then I realized that the world also could get better as well as the negativity, so that was from like the late 90s. And then when COVID hit, I thought, shit, this is really kicking off now, because my brain still was watching, a little bit the media and seeing what's going on. And, that most of my charge around my adopted dad had gone, but there was still stuff there. So when COVID kind of hit, I was straight away like, this is serious. This, I saw the whole media like around January, February last year. Normally they're like fish in a pond, all different fish flowing in different directions, and suddenly they're all going in one direction, whether they're left or right, the media,
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, this is some shit coming down the pan here, and with COVID, and then when it hit and the lockdown started, I was in a super reaction and anti-lockdown, anti-masks, and all of this for about 2 months. And then at some point, a lot of that, whatever was residual charge or whatever was motivating me, kind of wore out. I don't know exactly, and I also became concerned. There were high fatalities, even if you look at just residual mortality, how many people are actually dying compared to how many people normally die that week. There were a lot of fatalities, and there's other reasons partly why they could happen. But I was also like, whoa, maybe this shit is really real, because I didn't really believe it before, or I didn't think it was so bad, and it was all being exaggerated by the media, and they were just terrifying people as usual. And then I thought, whoa, maybe it's really, extreme. And I volunteered for some health stuff, which they didn't really need me for, and whatever. But it was more of a journey. And I came to kind of look upon it more like the lockdown, because now in the UK, we've had like fucking months of lockdown, and like, really. And I came to look upon it more like one of the kind of limit situation groups I'd done when I was doing a lot of therapy, where they'd lock you in a room for like 4 days or something, 2 or 3 days, 30 of you on a training, and just see what kind of crazy shit you got up to in all your interactions, being, not having your normal escape routes and stuff like that, which is actually a very good therapeutic process.
Yeah.
As long as you've got awareness and as long as it's held properly, So I started to treat it on that level as an awareness exercise, okay, I'm missing going to shops. I can't meet my friend for coffee, can't go down the pub, whatever. And that was, pretty revelationary for me. At some point, I just deactivated my whole Facebook account, where a lot of my friends were busy either being pro-conspiracies or totally anti-conspiracies or whatever. And I've just settled into more of the personal aspects of the journey for me, and I don't know the fucking truth, I don't know, I don't know the truth. I saw a lot of very dodgy shit going on with the medical industry, with a lot of high up virologists, all. What really triggered me, something I don't even know exactly why it triggered me, but it triggered me was like the Lancet is this huge, medical journal respected worldwide. They had one article on hydroxychloroquine, a negative, which turned out to be a completely fake piece of writing.
A falsified study. Yeah.
Insane.
Totally.
Then even worse than that, they had 27 of the most senior virologists on the planet all came out and signed this letter in the Lancet, which said, there is no way this thing has escaped from a Wuhan lab. And it was well recognized that it had come from Wuhan, and it certainly looked like it had, but there were 2 of these high security biotech labs there, and that they'd been doing gain of function research on back coronaviruses. And I was like,
coming out now, this story is breaking.
But my point was like, okay, I don't know if it's come from the lab or not, but the very fact that 27, I have worked in science in a government lab myself for a few years before dropping out as a kid, and just my knowledge of science is such that there was no way you could make a statement that categoric. There was no way.
No possible way. No.
And the article actually said anyone who believes otherwise is a conspiracy theorist. And I was like, what the fuck? This is like February, March last year. And like all these senior virologists have come out and made this statement, which I couldn't see any scientist ever being able to justify. They were just being honest. And it was like
armored thinking. Yeah.
Well, it was just like spinelessness, really, because they might be very intelligent, but because there was a certain level of psychological pressure being exerted by the WHO, and probably people, like you say, worried about upsetting China, they had to all come out and make a statement that was totally untenable scientifically. And now most of them are recanting, basically.
Right. And look at the WHO's history of interactions in Africa, and it's pretty nightmarish what they're undergoing lawsuits, and some of the senior officials in WHO are not welcome in
Really?
African countries because of
Right.
testing drugs on people without their consent. And
Right.
it's a whole rabbit hole I've been down, and I don't know how useful it is. I enjoy learning about that, but it kind of, and I'll have to go soon here, but I really think I would like, if you're into it, I think we could do a few more of these, because we've touched on a lot of things, but maybe, we'll see how people respond. But I think I want to encourage folks on your YouTube who end up watching this, like, put questions that interest you guys, and then maybe we can make a list of those, or, whatever I'm inspired by.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Yeah,
We touched on like at least 20 different things that I think we could do a nice 30-minute chunk on and go deep with.
Yeah.
It could be helpful for you and I, but also for the people listening. Because these are things that are, for a lot of people, are very black and white ways of thinking. And you and I think differently, which is interesting. And I'm not concerned if we agree or disagree on anything. I'm concerned with expanding my own bubble and expanding the bubble of anybody listening. So even if it's great. It's better than if we had the exact same mindset, then.
Yeah, sure. No, it's good. I mean, it's
but yeah,
really beneficial for me to discuss things with other people and be open-minded and listen and listen to people's questions, because it's curious, but I seem to develop new ideas often through that process. I had a previous feeling like I should just be able to think of new things, and that, but it seems to happen when I'm actually out interacting, but my mind becomes more like that, and creating useful mutations or whatever.
Yeah, that same here. And I encourage that with my clients. I'm like, you guys come with all the questions you can, because you're going to get the best out of me. You're going to get more of your money's worth if you ask as the toughest questions possible, because then I'm going to find myself creating solutions I didn't know existed. And there's a line in one of my favorite musicians I often repeat, Bonnie Prince Billy, this line in a song that says, when you think like a hermit, you forget what you know. Meaning, when it's all trapped in, I could sit at home and forget that I've been working on this for 20 years, and think like, what do I know? I'm no good for people, or down some weird mental track. I don't suffer from that often, but there's been dark moments where I'm like, what the hell is all this worth? And then I'm walking on the street and someone tells me, hey man, I hear that you're really good with helping people with some of this, anxiety or depression stuff. And then I go, oh yeah, dude, tell me what's going on for you. And I'm turned on, you know what I mean? I could have been feeling all down or upset or feeling ineffective. And then somebody asks a question and I'm like, oh, that's right. There's all this here. Like, yeah, I can help. And
right back into our mind kind of gets on, I do the same, and they call it like imposter syndrome in psychology sometimes, like, what the fuck do I know, and someone asks me a question, or I'm on someone else's live stream being the therapist, and it's like, and then suddenly I'm engaged with it all again, it's like, it's kind of weird.
I know, it's amazing. So that's where I see, like, yeah, you've got to come back down to experience yourself as an individual, but that individual is also a part of a society, a part of a group of people. Well, society doesn't really exist. It's a mental concept, but other people do exist, and you have to interact with them. There's the last thing I wanted to mention, maybe we can pick it up there later, is I was fascinated by the philosophy of Max Stirner, a German philosopher, and he, particularly the interpretations of his work through the eyes of Nishitani Keiji, who's a Zen-based Zen Buddhism educated, but also educated deeply in Western philosophy, who found what I see as somewhat of a unifying theory of both worlds. Stirner mentioned that basically the beginning of this process of individuation is what he called nihilism, and what we think of as nihilism, which is not an end point, but a process by which you divorce yourself from everything that's not you. Now, I see that as destroying the ideas of the world. The ideas you have of things are not the things, so that's not a cathedral. That's this experience I'm having, and I have to use a word to describe it, but the word is not the thing. So we destroy all of that world. That's what could be considered nihilism, and it destroys everything that's not the individual. And upon the completion of that process, everything in the world, all the other people, all the things come rushing back to you and integrate in an integrated way. And the way Stirner described it was, it is as close to me as my lungs, that other people in all the buildings and all the reality outside of you, you had to destroy the ideas of it in the segregated sense. And suddenly upon completing that, it comes rushing back in. And so that you treat the other people and the situations and everything the same way you would treat your own organs, as being that much of a function of the self. And that each individual treating each other in that way can only serve the highest good. So that's, to me, where I see individuality come back together with collectivism. But I don't think it can happen. I don't think you can just become a collectivist or become an individualist. I think this process is necessary, destroying that which is not you, to allow the whole thing to become the capital Y, you. You know what I mean? The I and thou united in this integrated experience of reality. So I know I just dropped a big bomb at the end there, but I hope that ties up some of the loose ends. But that's how I see it all come back together, where I can treat you the same way, as good as I would treat myself, because I'm experiencing you as an aspect of the self, the capital S self, you know?
Yeah, man.
I don't know. Man, I really like talking with you. This is super.
Yeah, it's nice to hang out and do this, you know.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
let's do another one sometime, and people, if they enjoy it, then they can, you know, put some questions down or whatever, you know, and all of that.
Yeah, I'll post it around and collect whatever questions. And if you hear stuff from other folks too, then we can just kind of use some of those questions and dive in again. Open-ended. But yeah, so be in touch, man, and we'll do another one. And yeah, in a couple weeks to a month, once we let this one propagate, I think it would be
sure.
Yeah,
nice, man, nice.
One other thing that comes to mind, it would probably be super fun if humans are allowed to travel again, or if the underground, you know, if they're not, then the underground is going to rise. So we'll be fine either way. But putting on some kind of workshop together might be I just want to plant that seed, because I think
man. Yeah, I mean, I'd be up for that. I'd be up for that. I was running a lot of 3 or 4 day process work, and I often like to do it with someone, or have bits they do and bits I do. Otherwise, it gets a bit much sometimes.
Yeah, I feel the same. I like to do around 7-day intensive, where we rent, like the one in out near Gloucester. I know I'm saying it funny, but I'm an American, forgive me. Out there in southwestern England, we would just rent a whole farm that had accommodation for 15 people. And so I limited it around to that number. And then everyone has to stay there. All the food comes from within 1 mile of the farm, you know? And so I try to make it super integrated. And people have to use the composting toilet at least once. You know, I want this cycle to be present in physical terms. And it goes from morning, we wake up, cook breakfast together. Then we have a chef, you know, and a caterer to prepare amazing lunch and dinners. And we stay up and watch movies until everyone falls asleep at, you know, really well curated films or clips of things. And then we wake up again. And so it's full immersion the whole 7 days, not go to the conference room, listen to Garrett and Devaraj talk for a while, and then go back to your old life. It's like, there's no escape. It's a spaceship, you know?
Well, I mean, my workshops are kind of like, okay, so you're going to be up at 6 or 7. And some of them we used to do cold showers for a bit.
Yeah.
Of energy, and then, you know, like dynamic meditation, breakfast, and then maybe I do like an hour of theory and questions, and then otherwise it's process work. And it's more like process work, intense bioenergetic or emotional expression exercises, and then quite a long lunch break for people to process them, and another big session in the afternoon, and then get the assistants to do something in the evening. You know, that was kind of how I was working. You know, but it is intense. It's kind of like, I mean, I was in the kind of washing machine processes for a long time myself, and that's the kind of space I hold. But I mean, let's just wrap a bit sometime and see if we want to come up with something. I'm sure sometime people will be able to travel again.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I like what you're saying, and I think we'll come up with some cool stuff. I build in sort of the padded walls for the intensity of the work to ramp up, but then you know that the lunch is going to be the best meal you've ever eaten. So it's kind of like there's these little points of safety and of nourishment and things that allow the person to go further into the intensity of the process work and of the emotional expression work, because we're going to be chilling out and watching a movie later, you know, or whatever it is. So there's kind of
it's good to have. I would usually open the bar for people to have a beer in the evening, right. But I'm kind of like, but in the daytime you're going to work, you know.
Yeah.
do that, you know.
Yeah. And I like to put wild swimming in there somewhere if it's possible. So I get locations that are near a river. So I want to get into the personal organic with the work, but then go into the greater organic and experience the fusion of them.
Nice.
Cool, man. All right. Yeah, let's do it again. I think we can go on and on. And hopefully we will.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it's really nice to do this, man. Really nice.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I feel really energized by connecting.
Yeah, great. Nice. Okay. So I guess we better end it there for now.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, we'll talk again soon. And again, to anybody listening, please send me or Devaraj your questions and your comments and what you'd like to hear more about. And then that's, like we just said, it's going to help us kind of go in the directions that'll be the most useful to everybody. And then, as you can see, we're going to have fun with it no matter what it is we talk about. So
great, man.
All right.
Cool, Garrett. Thank you.
All right. Thank you as well. We'll talk to you again soon.